I never set out to cause trouble. All I wanted was a peaceful space, a little pocket of nature I could retreat to after long, exhausting days. My backyard was the only place where I felt like I had full control, where the stress of the world couldn't touch me. So I turned it into a garden. Not just any garden, though. This was my sanctuary, and I designed it not just for me, but for the birds and butterflies that had slowly disappeared from our neighborhood. It started small. A couple of lavender bushes. A patch of milkweed. Some marigolds and echinacea to bring in the color, and hopefully, the butterflies. I added a bird feeder on a whim, then another. Before I knew it, I was spending hours every weekend tending to the plants, refilling feeders, and even reading up on which flowers best supported native pollinators. It didn't take long for life to find my little haven. Butterflies floated through the air like confetti. Monarchs, swallowtails, painted ladies, they fluttered in and out like old friends returning home. Hummingbirds zipped between the trumpet vines and salvia with their iridescent feathers flashing in the sun. Finches, robins, cardinals, even a pair of doves made daily visits. It was magical. The sounds were just as enchanting. In the morning, I'd sip coffee on my patio and listen to the soft coos, chirps, and fluttering wings. At night, crickets joined in with their own lullaby. It brought me back to my childhood summers, before neighborhoods were packed with concrete and noise, before everything had to be sterile and controlled. A few neighbors even stopped by to tell me how lovely it looked. One older woman down the block said she hadn't seen so many butterflies in years. A couple brought their kids to look at the caterpillars that had started appearing on the milkweed. It made me proud, not just of the garden, but of what it represented. It felt like I was doing something good, something right. And in a world that's always rushing, always loud, that small corner of calm meant everything to me. But then came the subtle signs. First, it was a passing comment from a neighbor I'd never really spoken to before. She leaned over the fence and said, "You know, the HOA prefers low-maintenance landscaping." I smiled and shrugged, thinking it was just a casual remark, not a warning. A week later, I found a note on my mailbox. Not official. Not signed. Just typed in bold letters. "Your yard is attracting pests. You've been warned." No explanation. No name. Just a folded piece of paper trying to scare me. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash, brushing it off as some crank with too much time on their hands. But deep down, something started to shift. I noticed fewer birds one morning. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, I didn't let it stop me. If anything, I doubled down. I added a small solar-powered fountain to the bird bath. Put up a butterfly house. Bought a squirrel-proof feeder to make sure the seeds weren't wasted. I even planted more flowers, cone flowers, black-eyed Susans, and bee balm. My garden exploded with color and life. It was everything I dreamed of. Then came the camera. It was subtle, barely visible, tucked high on a street lamp across from my house. But I knew it hadn't been there before. I asked around and got vague answers. "Security," someone said. "For monitoring traffic." But there wasn't much traffic on our quiet cul-de-sac. What were they really watching? The answer came in the form of a letter. This one official, stamped with the HOA's seal. "Notice of noncompliance, unauthorized landscaping activity." It claimed I had violated HOA guidelines by cultivating non-standard flora that may attract wildlife and pests. They gave me 10 days to bring the yard into compliance, or face fines. Wildlife and pests. As if there were no difference. I stood in my backyard that evening, watching the sunset bathe everything in gold, the flowers, the feeders, the soft flurry of wings. How could anyone see this as a problem? It wasn't just a garden. It was a living, breathing ecosystem. A sanctuary not just for me, but for everything the HOA seemed to hate. I ran my fingers over the soft petals of a coneflower, feeling this strange mix of anger and sadness building inside me. I wasn't hurting anyone. I wasn't violating any real rules. The plants were neat. The lawn was trimmed. The garden was organized and clean. The only wild thing about it was that it wasn't sterile and dead like every other cookie-cutter yard around here. But that, I was starting to realize, was the issue. The HOA didn't want color. It didn't want life. It wanted conformity, gravel, turf, and shrubs clipped into cubes. Nothing unpredictable. Nothing natural. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. They'd underestimated how much this place meant to me. This garden wasn't just dirt and flowers. It was peace, purpose, and everything I'd built with my own 2 hands. I'd poured my soul into it. And if they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. The letter sat heavy in my hands. Notice of noncompliance, unauthorized landscaping activity. Just reading it felt like someone had slapped me across the face. I blinked, rereading it over and over again, hoping maybe I had misunderstood. But no, it was clear. The HOA had officially declared war on my garden. They listed vague violations like non-standard flora, unauthorized structures, and conditions that may encourage pests or wildlife. No specific plant was named. No real evidence was given. Just a bunch of generic terms that could be twisted to mean anything they wanted them to mean. I flipped the page over, hoping for some sort of mistake or contact info to clear this up. Instead, I found a deadline, 10 days to comply, or I'd be fined $50 per day. After that, they said they'd take action themselves and recover costs through additional fines or property liens. I sat down hard on my patio chair, heart pounding in my chest. I looked around my garden, my sanctuary. It was blooming, peaceful, full of life. Bees buzzed lazily through the air, a goldfinch chirped from the fence, and butterflies danced between blossoms as if nothing was wrong. But now it felt tainted. Like any joy I had created here was under threat. The worst part? I had no idea where to start. What did they even want me to remove? The flowers? The feeders? The bird bath? Were they going to show up with a ruler and measure my plants like rebellious kids in a school uniform lineup? I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. There had to be a way to fix this. That night, I dug through the HOA's bylaws. It was a long, boring document filled with dense legal language and arbitrary rules. Landscaping was addressed in a small section that talked about maintaining visual uniformity and using approved plant materials. But there wasn't a single mention of what exactly was approved, or where to even find that list. I emailed the HOA immediately. I asked for clarification. I politely requested a list of the approved plants. I even offered to meet with someone to walk through my yard and identify the specific issues. No response. I called the number on the letter the next day. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I left a message. Nothing. 3 more days passed. Still no reply. So I showed up at the next HOA meeting. I walked into the community center with a folder full of photos, documents, and printed out emails. The meeting was already underway, and I could feel the stares as I took a seat in the back. The board members sat at a long table at the front of the room, 5 people I barely recognized despite living in the neighborhood for years. The president, a woman named Diane with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, was running the meeting with the cold efficiency of a judge. When it was time for resident comments, I stood up. I'd like to discuss a non-compliance notice I received regarding my backyard garden. I began, keeping my voice calm. Diane didn't even look up. You'll need to submit a landscaping modification request through the proper channels. I've read the guidelines. They're vague at best, and no one has responded to my emails or calls. I just want to know what exactly I've done wrong. At that, she finally met my eyes. Your property has been attracting wildlife and insects that may pose a nuisance to other residents. That's a violation. I stared at her, stunned. You mean the birds and butterflies? Another board member, a man named Gerald with a permanent frown, spoke up. We've received complaints about increased noise and droppings. Not everyone wants animals nesting near their property. I almost laughed. You do realize birds exist whether I put up a feeder or not, right? And butterflies aren't exactly known for their noise levels. Some chuckles rose from the back of the room, but Diane wasn't amused. We're not here to debate biology. Your landscaping is non-standard and must be brought into alignment with HOA regulations. Then tell me what's allowed. Where's the list? Show me what rules I broke. We're not obligated to provide individualized landscaping advice, she said flatly. You'll need to remove all unapproved features. Such as? If it's not turf grass, mulch, or pre-approved shrubs, it doesn't belong. I felt my jaw tighten. So anything that isn't boring or dead. Gasps. A few people murmured behind me. Diane narrowed her eyes. If you refuse to comply, we'll proceed with enforcement. I sat down seething. It wasn't just the vague rules or the lack of communication. It was the condescending way they spoke to me. Like I was a child being scolded for drawing outside the lines. Like I was less than because I wanted something different. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to me quietly. I think your garden's beautiful, one said. My kids love the butterflies, said another. A third whispered. They're just mad it doesn't look like everyone else's. That last one stuck with me. That was the real issue, wasn't it? My garden wasn't the problem. The problem was that it didn't match. It didn't blend into the beige sameness of the neighborhood. It stood out. And the HOA, in all its petty glory, couldn't tolerate that. That night, I stood on my back patio, surrounded by the soft buzz of night insects and the faint coo of a mourning dove. I looked at the feeders, the flowers, the fountain, all the things I had lovingly added over the past year. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to tear it all down just because a handful of people couldn't appreciate beauty. If they wanted me to fight, I would. I'd find every loophole, every line in their little handbook they had left open to interpretation. I'd research, gather support, and stand my ground. Because this wasn't just about flowers anymore. This was about principle. I never thought I'd become that neighbor, the one pushing back against the HOA. I'd always kept to myself, paid my dues, waved politely. But now, they were threatening something deeply personal. My garden wasn't just a hobby, it was my haven, and I wasn't going to let them destroy it without a fight. The first thing I did was document everything. I took photos of every inch of my backyard, each flower bed, every feeder, every species of bird and butterfly that regularly visited. I made notes: when they came, what they fed on, how they helped the ecosystem. I even started filming short clips, narrating how the birds and insects interacted with the plants. I wasn't just preparing to defend my garden, I was building a case. Next, I began researching my rights. The HOA might act like a government, but legally, they weren't above the law. I dug into the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS, and then I did something the board didn't expect. I called a local environmental attorney. The attorney, a woman named Grace, was intrigued. So they're threatening to fine you for supporting native wildlife? Yes. They say my garden violates landscaping guidelines and attracts undesirable animals. She chuckled. Well, depending on your state's environmental protections, especially for pollinators and migratory birds, you might have more leverage than you think. She helped me draft a formal response to the HOA, a polite but firm letter requesting a detailed explanation of the alleged violations, a copy of the approved plant list, and proof that my feeders and garden were in breach of any regulation. We also asked whether the board had considered the potential violations of federal protections for birds like hummingbirds and migratory finches. I sent it by certified mail. They couldn't ignore that. While waiting for their response, I started gathering neighborhood support. I knocked on doors, shared photos of the butterflies and birds, and explained what the HOA was trying to do. I was surprised by how many people were sympathetic. That's ridiculous, one mom said. My daughter loves watching the butterflies when we walk by your fence. Another neighbor, an elderly veteran, told me. I fought in a war so people could live freely. You want to grow flowers and feed birds, that should be your right. Even a teenager down the street got involved. She offered to make a short documentary about the garden for her school's media club. "If this goes viral," she said, "the HOA's gonna have a lot of explaining to do." I agreed. "Let's show people what they're really trying to destroy." Soon, I had a growing collection of testimonials, footage, and interviews. People began sharing it on local forums and neighborhood apps. My garden, once just a quiet corner of life, was becoming a symbol of peaceful resistance. Then came the response letter from the HOA. It was as smug as I expected. They doubled down on their position, claiming my feeders invited pest species. My garden was a fire risk due to dry plant matter, and that I had not obtained pre-approval for non-standard landscaping. Still, they failed to provide a list of approved plants or offer any real evidence. It was all threats and empty jargon. But they slipped up, badly. They referenced ongoing complaints from multiple board members. Not residents. Board members. It wasn't the neighborhood that had a problem, it was the board itself. That gave me ammunition. Grace helped me draft another letter pointing out the conflict of interest, requesting the names and evidence tied to the complaints, and reminding them of their obligation to act fairly and without bias. We also mentioned our intent to pursue mediation and possible litigation if retaliation or unlawful enforcement continued. I delivered that one by hand, straight to the HOA Dropbox. The next board meeting was packed. Word had spread, and people wanted answers. Some came out of pure curiosity, others in support. I brought a printout of the video the student had made. It showed my garden in full bloom, butterflies fluttering, a cardinal splashing in the bird bath. Soft music played in the background, and quotes from neighbors appeared in captions. When it was time for open comments, I stood. "I understand the HOA has rules to maintain the look and feel of the neighborhood," I said calmly. "But those rules cannot override basic human decency, environmental responsibility, or individual freedom." I held up a photo of a monarch butterfly landing on a milkweed bloom. "This is what you want me to destroy. This is what you claim is a nuisance. You're targeting me, not because I'm doing harm, but because I chose to create something different, something beautiful." There was applause. Diane, the HOA president, looked furious. "This isn't the appropriate venue for environmental debates." A neighbor spoke up. "But it is the venue to question your leadership. Why are you targeting her when her yard is the only one attracting birds and butterflies? That's not a violation. That's nature." More voices joined in. "I walk my dog past her place every day. It smells better than half the grass lots around here. My kid brought a painted lady butterfly into school for show and tell, and it came from her yard. We should be thanking her, not threatening her." The board looked rattled. Diane tried to regain control. "We'll review the concerns and revisit the matter at a later date." Too late. The damage was done. I walked home that night with a strange mix of exhaustion and pride. I hadn't won yet, not officially, but I'd taken the fight to them. And I'd made them sweat. Back in my garden, I stood silently among the blooms. A chickadee chirped from the oak tree. A swallowtail danced past my shoulder. This fight wasn't just for me anymore. It was for every quiet soul who found peace in petals, who believed nature belonged to everyone, not just to those with a clipboard and a rulebook. And I wasn't backing down. I thought the worst had passed. After the meeting, with the crowd of neighbors speaking out and the board clearly rattled, I truly believed they'd back off. Maybe pride would keep them from apologizing, but at least I figured they'd stop harassing me. I kept tending my garden every morning like usual, pruning the milkweed, refilling the feeders, watching the finches come and go. But peace in an HOA-run neighborhood never lasts long. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I had just come back from the grocery store with fresh oranges for the Orioles. I was humming to myself, pushing the cart into the kitchen, when I heard the unmistakable sound of shovels scraping and branches snapping. I rushed to the back door and froze. 2 men in fluorescent yellow vests were standing inside my yard. My yard. One of them had already yanked out half of my butterfly bush by the roots. Another was rolling up the bee garden netting. I could see a third one outside the fence with a clipboard, giving instructions like he was running a demolition crew. I stormed out, heart racing. "Hey! What are you doing? You can't just come in here." The one with the clipboard glanced up. "We're with the HOA. This landscaping violates Section 6.2 of the Community Maintenance Standards. You were issued a correction notice 2 weeks ago." "No, I wasn't," I snapped. "I got a letter that said the board would review the matter. There was no final decision. You don't have the right to destroy my property." "Ma'am," he said, not even looking me in the eyes, "this is scheduled compliance work. You can take it up with the board." I pulled out my phone and immediately started recording. "You are trespassing on my private property. I did not give permission for this. Leave. Now." One of the workers hesitated, clearly unsure. The other kept yanking up flowers. I ran to grab my garden hose and sprayed it toward the one closest to my milkweed plants. "Get away from my monarchs!" They backed off just long enough for me to block the entrance gate with my body. "Call the police if you want. This is illegal." They left, but the damage was done. Almost half of my native plants were gone. My hummingbird feeder was broken. The carefully arranged wildflower slope I'd worked on for over a year had been stomped through like it was nothing more than a weed patch. I was shaking. I sat down in the middle of the wreckage and cried. The worst part wasn't just the destruction, it was how calculated it all felt. They knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't wait for a final board vote. They didn't bother to notify me. They saw me as some flower-loving nuisance who didn't know when to quit, and they wanted to make an example out of me. And they did. But they forgot something: I had receipts. And now, I had footage too. I immediately sent the video to Grace, my attorney. They entered my backyard without consent. Destroyed property. Gave no written notice of any enforcement. "Can we take action?" She responded within minutes. "This is bigger now. We can absolutely hit them with a cease and desist and pursue damages. Let's talk today." I also uploaded the video to the same neighborhood forum where people had supported me before. And this time, it blew up. People were outraged. Who gave them the right to destroy her property? Even if it was non-compliant, this is not how you handle it. I'm pulling my kids out of their nature project. If they think plants and butterflies are a nuisance, this place isn't for families. The student who made the earlier video messaged me and said she was editing a follow-up. This time it's personal. "I want everyone to see what they did to your garden." Neighbors began organizing on their own. Some talked about running against the current board. Others offered to help replant. One even gave me a gift card to a native nursery nearby. "You inspired us. This fight's not over," she said. Meanwhile, Grace helped me file a formal complaint against the HOA. Trespassing. Destruction of personal property. Harassment. We included timestamps, video evidence, and the absence of any valid enforcement notification. The next board meeting? You couldn't even find a seat. And I didn't go in quiet. I printed full-size photos of the aftermath: plants ripped from the ground, feeders shattered, birds circling confused above the empty yard. I set them on a poster board and faced the panel. "You didn't just tear out a garden," I told them, voice trembling but firm. "You tore out a safe space for wildlife. You destroyed a project that brought joy to children, beauty to the community, and peace to me. And worst of all, you did it without even giving me the basic respect of a phone call." Diane, the board president, tried to wave it off. "We followed procedure." "No, you didn't," I interrupted. "And we'll see you in court." Gasps. Someone clapped. For once, Diane didn't have a smug comeback. I looked out at the room full of people who had watched my garden grow, watched it get torn down, and now saw the injustice for what it was. I'm not here asking for sympathy. I'm here asking for accountability. That night, a neighbor dropped off a potted milkweed plant with a note. "You gave life to something beautiful. Let's rebuild together." I set it down where the butterflies used to gather, just under the oak tree. The branches swayed above me, a soft breeze carrying the scent of broken stems and fresh hope. They may have torn down my garden, but they didn't destroy what it stood for. After the board meeting, things shifted in ways I hadn't expected. The tension in the air wasn't just between me and the HOA anymore, it was between the community and the people who were supposed to represent us. Neighbors stopped whispering and started organizing. Within a few days, flyers began circulating about a community reclamation meeting. It wasn't official, not sanctioned by the HOA, but it was held right outside the clubhouse lawn. Chairs were set up. Snacks were served. People came, not to complain, but to plan. I couldn't believe it when I walked up and saw over 40 residents, including families, elderly couples, and even teens with sketchbooks and signs that read, "Save the Pollinators," and HOA equals Habitat Obliteration Association. They gave me a standing ovation when I arrived. I sat beside a mother whose daughter used to count butterflies in my yard for a school science journal. She cried when she saw the video. The mom said, "We want to help replant everything." Another man introduced himself as a landscape architect. "I'll donate my time," he said. "We'll design something even better, something they can't touch." That night, as I walked home, heart full and hands holding a box of donated seeds and saplings, I finally allowed myself to hope again. But justice, real justice, wasn't going to be just about planting flowers again. It was going to be about accountability and legal action. Grace, my attorney, didn't waste any time. With the footage, emails, timestamps, and destroyed property value estimates, she built a rock-solid case. The cease and desist letter was just the beginning. We filed a formal complaint with the county, and she initiated a civil suit for damages, trespassing, destruction of private property, and harassment. And then came the part one hadn't expected, the press. A local environmental blog picked up the story after the student from earlier uploaded her follow-up video. Then a local news station called. They wanted an interview. I hesitated at first. I'm not someone who seeks attention. But Grace encouraged me, and deep down, I knew telling the story wasn't just about me anymore. So I agreed. They filmed me standing in front of the ravaged garden bed, showing clips from the original video, and overlaying it with footage of butterflies visiting the milkweed I'd just replanted with the neighborhood kids. When the story aired that night, the response was overwhelming. Donations flooded in. A local nursery offered me free plants. An elementary school science teacher emailed me asking if she could bring her class by to help build a butterfly corner. Someone even offered to help fundraise for legal fees. The best part? The pressure worked. Within 2 weeks, the HOA board was forced to hold an emergency meeting. This time, the room was so packed they had to move it outdoors. Diane, the board president who had been smug and dismissive through it all, was clearly flustered. She tried to maintain control of the meeting, but the residents weren't having it. "I move to vote out the current board," one neighbor shouted. "Seconded," came from 3 others. It turned chaotic quickly, with residents demanding answers. Someone brought a poster board listing all the instances of overreach and intimidation the HOA had carried out in the past year. And that was the moment someone dropped the bombshell. A man stood up and said, "I've reviewed the bylaws. The board didn't follow protocol when they ordered the destruction of her garden. In fact, they acted outside their authority." Gasps. Murmurs. Phones recording everything. A lawyer in the crowd, yes, a real estate attorney who lived 3 houses down, confirmed it. Not only did they violate due process, but they also violated property rights outlined in the HOA's own covenant. There are grounds to invalidate their decision. That night, 3 board members resigned, including Diane. It was surreal. Just weeks ago, I had felt powerless against their cruelty. Now, I was watching the very people who tore down my garden get forced out by the same community they were supposed to protect. As the sun set that night, I walked back to my yard. There were still gaps, empty patches where the milkweed used to stand, a sad dent where the hummingbird feeder had hung, but there was also new life. Someone had planted sunflowers while I was gone. Little hand-painted signs poked out of the soil. Hope grows here. Justice is blooming. And my favorite, welcome back, butterflies. But the sweetest moment came a few days later. I was standing at my kitchen window, drinking tea, when I saw a flash of orange flutter by. A monarch. Then another. They danced above the wildflowers, landed softly on a coneflower, and stayed. I walked outside slowly, barefoot, feeling the warm earth beneath me. I kneeled next to the plants. There, nestled underneath a leaf, was a tiny monarch egg. The garden was healing. I was healing. And the community? We were stronger than ever. The HOA's new interim board included people who had been at the community meetings, people who cared. They worked with me to revise the landscaping rules to allow pollinator gardens and native plants, even helping draft a new, eco-friendly yard guideline to encourage residents to do the same. I didn't just get my garden back. I helped create something bigger, a movement in our neighborhood. The legal case? We won. The HOA settled, covering damages, legal fees, and even paying restitution for the environmental destruction. It wasn't just a victory, it was a message. You can't bulldoze over what people love and expect them to stay silent. Looking back, I still remember the sound of branches snapping that day, the feeling of loss as I saw my sanctuary torn apart. But now, I also remember the laughter of kids planting new seeds, the smell of fresh soil and blooms, and the joy of watching butterflies dance again. They tried to kill my garden to silence me, to break my spirit. But they didn't realize, you can't bury someone who knows how to grow. And I've got a whole community gardening with me now.